And could you hook this up, please?
Yep.
Or whatever.
Let me turn. Okay, you're turned on.
I'm hooked.
You're up
okay,
ready
thank
to
you.
go.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, no, Can you hear him? What?
Say something.
Go say something. Not a little loose. It's all
Thank you,
yours.
Mike, for inviting us to this meeting. And actually, my daughter, a few weeks before Mike invited me, she wanted to know more, talk to me about what happened to me when I was a child. And when I saw the library over there, I said, hooray, now I can get some books about my stay in a concentration camp in Indonesia. I was disappointed, however, because there are no books there. Not a single book about a concentration camp in Indonesia. But that is style. Everything that I talk about, you'll read on the screen. So if you cannot, events occurring while growing up in Indonesia. Over here, I will be talking about that also, my dad being in the bridge on the River Kwai. It is rare to meet an individual who has heard of the country of Indonesia. There you have a good map of it. Although it is land of over 16,000 or 17,000 islands. 3,500 have people living on it. Indonesia has by far the largest Muslim population in the world. 240 million Muslim people live in Indonesia. As a matter of fact, former President Obama attended the school in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. It is also the home of the orangutan, which means in Indonesian, orang means person, utan means forest. In addition, one of the Denver Zoo's most unique and fascinating creatures comes from Indonesia, the Komodo dragon. Java is about half the size of Colorado, 1/2 the size. 1,000 miles long, 50 miles wide. 50 times 1,000 is 50,000, half the size of Colorado, which is 100,000 square miles. Okay, population of 160 million versus 5.77 million in Colorado. But that is not all we have on Indonesia. Over here, we have a mountain. And there are 32 active volcanoes on the island of Java alone. This one happens to be 25 miles from where we live, something like Colorado Springs and Mount Evans. And it has a bad habit of exploding. In 2010, 353 people were killed. 3 years later, 2013, another explosion, some more people killed. 2018, another explosion, some more people killed. Since 1920, we have had many minor explosions. I do not know if the next volcano is mentioned among the 32, but that is over here, the Krakatau. The Krakatau is right on an island right here. The Krakatau. The Krakatau exploded in 1883. 30,000 people were killed by that explosion. Over here, somewhere over here, was a patrol ship, patrol boat. Four officers, 20 enlisted men. That boat, after the storm, was located 60 miles up on a hill. 60 miles, so that's how high the ocean went. That is this one, the Krakatau. Right on the other side, you have a small island called Sumbawa. And the mountain is called Tambora. Tambora had an explosion in 1815. 1815. Once again, it killed 30,000 people, but also it put 30 cubic miles of dust in the atmosphere. 30,000. This was the biggest explosion period ever. Let me get this. In 1936, I was born in the Dutch East Indies, city of Batavia. We moved to Semarang when I was a child, few months old. This is Jakarta, where I was born, and over here we moved to Semarang. I might mention this one a little bit, and at the end I'll talk about this city a little bit, which is 50 miles south of Denver, of Colorado, or Semarang. Over here is my dad. You have a picture over there, and that's me. To be very truthful, I haven't changed a bit. I just look like him, don't I? Okay, this is my oldest brother. He was 9 years older than I was, and he moved to Australia. This is my second brother. You see him a couple more times, Gerard, and he moved to Canada. And here's my mother. So there we go. My dad, my mother, my oldest brother, 9 years older than I was, 7 years older, and me, and I haven't changed. My dad was a high school teacher and the mayor of Semarang. My mother was a socialite. Therefore, the first 6 years, I was essentially raised by the servants. By age 6, things changed drastically for our entire family. What happened? How could such a change happen so quickly? Weren't the Dutch a world superpower? Yes, indeed. In the 1600s, 400 years ago, the Netherlands was a superpower when Indonesia became a colony of the Netherlands. Over here is Japan. Japan is about the size of California. In 1940, it had a population of over 70 million. But this is about California, to give you an idea about size-wise. Japan lived for a long time, more or less, in isolation. In 1867, Lieutenant Commander Perry of the USA visited Japan and convinced the leaders of Japan to open her borders to the world. Japan changed policy. Japan saw advantages. Here's Japan. Here's Japan again, size of California. Just to give you an idea of how big is it, 73 million people. Japan saw advantages of quickly expanding their industry. This would give Japan a strategic advantage with regard to their neighbors, especially a weak and divided China. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Japan started an aggressive expansion program in 1930. Japan invaded the province of Manchuria. Over here, this is China, and this is Manchuria. China is approximately the size of America. To give you some ballpark, don't argue with a couple miles one way or another, but this is about the size of America. In 1937, Japan led to completely invasion of vast territories of China. This is what we're talking about. This was something between Texas and Alaska. This is a big piece of land. Like Hitler, Japanese people were regarded as a semi-divine race, while national Asians, Chinese, were regarded as subhuman. Does that ring a bell with what Hitler was talking about? The Germans, were super race, and all the other ones were subhuman. Over here we have a similar picture like we have over there, and I'll thank you, Mike, for that one. I think that really shows well, because later on I will use that also. Over here, and you can see it over there, this is Australia is only 100 miles south of Indonesia. Due to the aggressive nature of Japan against China, America placed an embargo of oil shipment to Japan. In other words, America cut off the oil to Japan because Japan was fighting against China, and they do not have any oil. So America provided that, and China said, hey, cut that out, will you? And they listened. So that was one thing. Also, British Burma also placed an embargo of export of rubber to Japan. Burma is about 2.5 times the size of Colorado, just to give you an idea what we are talking about. Thailand is about twice the size of Colorado. And over here, a railroad was built from here to here. Okay. Japan's plan, and it is shown over there, but you can see it over here. Japan intended to do a lot of conquering, and maybe I'll stick over here. You can see this line. Can you see this? This is what they intended to conquer in 6 months' time, because there was a reason for it. They wanted to go to Indonesia because of the oil. They wanted to go to Burma because of the rubber. First of all, we have this over here, and it is a nice job over there. Japan decided to get rid of the Japanese, of the American fleet. Then 3 months later, and this was another major disaster for the Allied, what happened over here. That is not mentioned over here, but this was absolutely major. 3 months later, the Battle of the Coral Sea, we know about that one. And finally, everybody in this room knows about these two battles. This one you might not know. This one was give or take. Okay, what is going on? All the places needed to be conquered in 6 months, since Japan had only a 6-month supply of oil. Am I doing okay, Mike? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. This 12/7, December 7th, we know about it. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Over here, 3 months later, 3 months after this time, there was another major disaster. 2 months after this one, we had this. And 1 month after this, we had this. Are you with me? Just between here and here is 6 months. But this was another catastrophe for Allied forces. Battle of Java Sea. Why invade the Dutch East Indies? Several people have asked me that even in this building. Why? For oil. The Dutch East Indies was the 4th largest producer at that time. 4th largest. USA, Russia, Venezuela, Indonesia. Although once a superpower, the Netherlands, in the 1930 war, in the 1930s, war was not a part of the Dutch psyche, evidenced by armed forces of only 25,000 men and obsolete equipment. My personal feeling, but I have no reference, but Mike has, was that they were recruited after Pearl Harbor. On the other hand, Japan had the best equipped, by far, and experienced armed forces of 150,000 men. Excellent navy, as you will see in the Java Sea, what happened there. And the best air force, the Zero airplane, was the fastest and the best. For the kill ratio was 12-1. They wiped out the Chinese Air Force, they wiped out the British Air Force in Singapore, they wiped out the Dutch Air Force in Indonesia. 12-1 for every single Zero they lost. 12 of the opponents were knocked down. Too loud? Too
I'm turning the temperature.
Okay, sorry. The Zero was in control up till the middle of 1943. Then America came up with the P-51. Japan wanted to expand their sphere of influence. During the early months of 1941, in secret, the Japanese military command drew up plans to conquer what? The Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia, and rubber from Burma. Japan thought if they could just destroy the American fleet, if they could accomplish the rest. We all know this. I'm talking, everybody in this room know about this. Okay, there's nobody behind me. I thought he was trying to tell me something. On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, we know this date, 7:53 a.m., the American Pacific Fleet was attacked by aircraft from the Japanese Naval Force Task Force. About an hour later, Hawaiian time, a second attack occurred. These attacks provoked the U.S. into World War II. Just black and white. We did not have color TV then. Success for the Japanese was beyond expectation. About 18 ships were sunk. The Arizona are damaged. About 24. Keep this number in mind because it happened 2 more times later on in the presentation. Not exactly 24, but close to it. 24 American servicemen died. It happened, you will see that number 2 more times. But was it successful? The Japanese destroyed obsolete warships. Obsolete. You see the same thing happening later on. Cruisers and destroyers from World War I. No damage to the huge oil storage tanks. No damage to the dry docks. But more important than anything else, what was the most important thing that was not destroyed? No damage to aircraft carriers. By the way, at the beginning of World War II, Japan had 10 or 11 aircraft carriers. America in the Pacific Ocean had 6. To the best of my, is that correct? In late 41, when war with Japan appeared imminent, that was Pearl Harbor, my dad was called up to enter the Dutch Armed Service Reserve. This is one that is not mentioned there, but that is crucial and also devastating. The next sea battle was February 27th, 1942, 3 months almost to the date after Pearl Harbor. The Japanese Navy, protecting their transport ships, wanting to land troops on the island of Java. That is where I was born and raised. This island over here. The Japanese fleet was over here protecting transport ships. The Allied Navy, solid. American cruiser, Australian cruiser, British cruiser, and 2 Dutch cruisers had a solid navy, more ships. But just the same thing what happened in Pearl Harbor, they were obsolete. Hence, the Allied Navy was completely soundly defeated. Which number did I ask you to remember before? How many do I have here? 23. 2,300 sailors died, gave their lives on the Battle of the Java Sea. That is not mentioned there, but this is crucial. 2 ships were later sent to Japan, to Australia, only 100 miles south of there. Both were destroyed also, and their accompanying other ships. So we lost all cruisers. This is that battle was crucial, absolutely crucial. The Allied forces were wiped out. The Japanese invaded and took control of the more populated islands of the Dutch East Indies. Sumatra, that long island over there, twice the size of Colorado. Borneo, where they have oil, 3 times the size of Colorado. Hopelessly outmanned. The Dutch army surrendered after only 5 days of fighting on the island of Java. March 8th, 3 months after Pearl Harbor, the Dutch army in Indonesia surrendered. Disgusting what you will be seeing next. I talked to somebody, what are you going to talk about? I said, it is disgusting. It is sickening what you will be seeing pretty soon. I could not believe it. And I'll give you the picture after the rest. I will go turn back, and then in all likelihood, you will agree. Australians in a pig basket, 1942. When the Dutch army surrendered, some Australian soldiers continued to fight for the Dutch. When the Australians finally surrendered, the Japanese beat the soldiers. They beat the soldiers. Later on, I'll talk about it, but the way the Japanese were thinking, the Bushibo Code. I'll talk about that later. Put the soldiers in a bamboo pig basket. I'll show you on the next 2 slides. And stack them up on a truck. The poor soldiers were begging for water. The trucks were driven to a seaport. The baskets were loaded on a boat. The boat left for the ocean. And the soldiers in the pig baskets were tossed overboard. About 400 lost their lives that way. Do you agree? After what I read over here, that this was true? Can everybody agree with that? Now we go to next. Over here, the pig is being let loose. The pig is being let loose, and our Australian soldier is put in the pig basket. Over there, another one is waiting to be put in the pig basket. Then they were loaded on a truck. Here you see the truck, and here you can see the Japanese picking up the pig baskets, putting them on the truck. The next step is they take them to a seaport, put them on a boat, throw them overboard. All 400, they did not go to a prisoner of war camp. They were thrown in the ocean. Shortly after the surrender of the Dutch POW, men, including my dad, were sent to war camp on the Thailand-Burma Railroad. For some reason, it was called the Death Railroad. Now I will talk about my dad, and then again another one, and then finally the last one I will be talking about the concentration camp with my mother and me. There are 4 kinds of camps. Basically, I will personally be just talking about the first 2, but I will explain the other 2 also. The first one, prisoner of war, my dad, for soldiers captured or surrendered. I don't think there's any argument about that over here. Everybody should understand that one. The concentration camp. I talked to a person recently over here, and he visited a concentration camp in Poland. That was not a concentration camp. This concentration deal has several explanations in the internet, but this one I like. And later on you'll see a definition of it. Concentration camp for women and children. My mother and my 2 brothers and myself went to a concentration camp. There are 2 more, but there might be more. The other one is resettlement camp or internment camp in the USA for Japanese, mostly living in California. Some of them went to Colorado, and some people, I know 2 for certain, have seen the camp in Colorado. I have not. Finally, This is what the person in here called a concentration camp. I call it an extermination camp. Mostly in Poland, where about 6 million Jews were exterminated, mostly in gas chambers, and additional 6 million afterwards. The train came every morning. The Jews had to unload and get into the camp. Within 12 hours, all the people that were on the train were dead, to be taken to the gas chamber, to be taken to ovens. Now we talk about the prison, the POW camps. From Pearl Harbor, we talked about over there, the start of World War II for America and Indonesia, to the bridge on the River Kwai. My dad worked on the bridge on the River Kwai, not the bridge per se, but there was a 250-mile long railroad. Because of the movie, somebody might have seen it. It was shown last Sunday evening, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago Sunday. I liked the movie. I think they did a phenomenal job. But they made a Hollywood movie out of it, more or less. Some of the things were not true. The POWs did not destroy the railroad, whatever. Okay, some Americans have heard some. Recently, many people, what are you talking about? They never heard about the bridge on the River Kwai and what happened there. Some Americans have heard about what happened there. It is also known as the Death Railroad. This is a good, similar to what you have over here. All this area is Indonesia. 3 times Colorado, twice times Colorado, half times Colorado. Over here, you have the railroad, the Death Railroad, the bridge on the River Kwai. Over here, you have a small piece of Japan, same size as California. Over here, you have China, same size as America. Over here, this is only 100 miles. The ship I was talking about happened over here. Every ship, the whole Allied Navy was wiped out completely. And some of the ships tried to go over here and they got wiped out here and here. None were left. Are you with me, still with me? The River Kwai Railroad, also known as a Death Railway, was built to provide safer access to Burma. Okay. The way to get to Burma before the railroad was to go this way. It's 2,000 miles. But there was some bad people over here, the English submarines. And you talk about that I will mention the 3rd time that we talk about. What number did I ask you to remember? How many? Talk about that again. They were trying to build this railroad in order to avoid going around here. 2,000 miles take a while. This railroad was built, but they were transporting men and material to Burma to fight the English. English didn't like that. So the English bombers tried to destroy the railroad, and they succeeded a couple times. But by doing so, not all the bombs hit right on the railroad, but also hit the POW camps. The Burma-Thailand Railroad, this is 250 miles long. It was built. You will see some pictures. This, and you see it at the end, is where my dad is buried. The Thailand-Burma Railroad, this must have been taken after the war because it is colored. Here you see, and I wish I had joined my brother to visit my dad's grave because cutting this out with pick and shovel, hard for me to believe. Over here, you see some railroad tracks. The next one you see even more railroad tracks. Look over here. Here, just quickly some pictures of after war, the railroad, another one, another one. The Burma-Thailand Railroad. The Burma-Thailand Railroad had become a knockout race for the fittest. Men that were older, like my dad, did not make it. Many people that survived as a POW in this particular camp and also in a concentration camp had permanent health issues afterwards. The Burma Railroad had become a knockout race for the fittest. For those who made it, life had almost ended in massacre. The Japanese army itself was brutal. They thought differently, and they taught their people differently, just like the Hamas teaches people differently from what you are being taught in America. It was common for an officer to slap the face. How many over here have been slapped by the boss? How many? He always had to intervene. Yeah. The Japanese army itself was brutal. Does that bother anybody?
No.
So that the guy in the Red Vest will not get upset with me.
Well, we want you to be in the
I know. It was common for an officer to slap the face of a subordinate, beat him, or what? Or even put him to death as a normal rule of discipline. Where did that come from? The Bushido Code. The Japanese lived by a different rule, by the Bushido belief that life was not important. They considered it a great honor to die for the emperor. And I'll give you some examples of that. The Japanese soldier would never surrender. Never surrender. There were thousands of Japanese soldiers on the island of Imashima. How many surrendered? A handful. There were 100,000 defending in Okinawa. How many surrendered? A handful. My wife and I visited the island of Saipan. There was a huge cliff, about 50, 100 feet tall. When the Japanese on that island were losing the war, what was obvious, what did they do? They jumped off the cliff into the ocean on rock. So most of them were badly wounded or dead. The Japanese soldier would never surrender, since it would bring shame on his family and the emperor. The Burma-Thailand Railway. No Japanese cared as long as the railroad was ready as targeted. And it was. It was finished as scheduled. But then the British bombed the railroad a few times. This is a sad one. Thailand-Burma Railroad. 61,000 POWs between 20 and 40, something like that, worked on the railroad. 13,000 died. How many people can think of 61,013 died? Of them, there were not many Americans there, mainly British, Australian, and Dutch. Of the 686, just a few, American POWs, 19% died. Most died during the final phase. Now you get the breakdown. Over here you can see America, 686, 131 died. So that leaves 550. 550 in all likelihood, everyone is dead today. There's not a single one alive. Over here the British and the Australians, probably prisoners from Battle of Singapore. Over here you have 18,000, probably most all of them came from the island of Java. That is where the Dutch soldiers were. Total These is 61,000, but this one is 136. 41% of the people died. Why the Malaysians had such a high death rate, I have no idea. The Dutch had a low death rate because that was Indonesia, and the doctors were accustomed to the sicknesses that they were encountering over there. The next one, my wife told me, don't do it. Tropical diseases. We have somebody, at least one, that knows about medical stuff. My dad had malaria. Malaria is from a mosquito bite. He had that, and it is high, and all of a sudden you lose all your energy, you can't do nothing. He also had this one. This one is lack of vitamin B3. I had beriberi in the camp, and I was in the prison, in the concentration camp, in the hospital. When I was 9 years old, my stomach looks like a woman that was 8 months pregnant. That gives you an idea. That is beriberi. What is that? Lack of proper nutrition, lack of B1. Many of the people that were in the camps, POW or concentration, afterwards they had major issue for the rest of their lives. Okay. My wife argued about ulcers. Why have tropical ulcers? Tropical ulcers usually occurs just on the bottom of your leg, on the foot of your leg, or the bottom of your leg over here. You scratch yourself, you have a minor incident, you get infected, no medication, and even with medication it is hard to cure. This is this. Oh, sorry about that. This is this. My dad had that. Lack of B3. He did not make it. Illness. It was the cheapest and most effective. Genocide. I never thought about it. I thought just no food or something. No, it was genocide. Get rid of all the Dutch people. Get rid of those people. Then we can take it. Corpses don't need to be sustained. And before they became corpses, they made themselves useful to the glory of the army. There are no pictures taken. There were no pictures in the POW camp in Burma, Thailand. No pictures in the concentration camp. All the cameras were confiscated. Gone, 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 gone. You want to take pictures, but there are no cameras. Did I show any pictures on the Burma Railroad? No. They were all confiscated. Now, for some reason, the next one has shown pictures. That is not pretty either. But keep in mind what one number I asked you to remember. That will be coming up.
Louis, will you cover what was like for your family in the concentration camp?
That comes afterward. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about that. Not only a railroad track in Thailand, but Burma, but also in Sumatra. Sumatra is the second, is that island on the corner, this island. The Japanese wanted the railroad built from the east coast to the west coast. This is the infamous Pakanbaru Railroad in Sumatra. $7,000 Dutch people were there. The purpose for the POW, fix the railroad and mine coal. There was a boat, a Japanese boat, and they carried 2,300 Dutch POWs from Java to work on the railroad over here. There were 7,000 Dutch people over here. But something happened over here. Yunomano carried 2,000, do you remember, 2,400 and 2,300 Dutch POWs. The ship was torpedoed. of those 2,300 Japanese POWs, less than 1% survived, got on the island of Sumatra. 20 survived. Of the 20, 10 survived the end of the war. The railroad was just finished on August 15th, 1945, just in time for people to get out. Officers were not permitted to work on military projects by the Hague Convention of 1907, but refusing to work meant execution by the Japanese guard. This must have been taken before the end, because the next two people that you see, all you see is skin and bone. Skin and bone, and later on I will talk about that. Is that skin and bone? Now you see another picture of the tropical. The hospital. Who wants to go to this hospital? The other minor problem is no medicine, no medication. So where do you end up? Over here. 4 kinds of camps. I talked about the prisoner of war. Now I will go to the concentration camp for women and children. My daughter wanted me to talk about concentration camp, about my experience in a concentration camp. And shortly thereafter, the person with the red vest asked me if I could give a presentation. But I also saw the library over there, and I was elated. Oh, finally, there's a library that has some books about the concentration camp. So I looked, I didn't find any. I looked again, didn't find any. Finally, I talked to one of the secretaries. He said, "Are there any books in there?" She said, "No." But then she looked up some more in the forget it. And she said, "This book is there. This is the book that I got from my brother." This lady was a daughter. She probably was born in the late 20s, 1928, 1926, 1928. She immigrated to Canada. In Canada, my brother immigrated to Canada. And over there, just like we go once a month to a Dutch club, to an Indonesian club in Denver, my brother goes to an Indonesian club in Canada. Apparently, she was the main speaker over there, and her kids insisted that she write a book about her experience. This is her writing, this is her. So apparently she was the author over there. She went to 8 different camps. Her husband went to the same place where my dad went. She went to 8 different camps in Indonesia. The first year and a half, her and her 6 kids went to one camp, and that one was not bad. The next one was a little bit worse. The next one was a little bit worse. And finally she was going to go close to Semarang, where I was, and that apparently was the worst camp. She dreaded to go to the camp. That is where my mother and I were, Camp Lampersari. We'll show you some more about that later on. Okay, this is the book. This is the only book. You do not have it. Concentration camps, definition. One of the definitions has been understood as a place of mistreatment, starvation, forced labor, murder. As a 6-year-old, my mother and I were sent to a concentration camp. What was life like for me in a concentration camp? When children did something wrong, the mothers were beaten. I was never beaten by a guard, but my mother was, and her face was blue for the next 6 months. A person's life did not matter. The folks who ran these camps were unusually capable of making life as unpleasant as possible. They were masters in the art of dehumanization. Favorite punishment in the camp, the humane punishment of beating or flogging, could happen to any innocent person if the guilty person was not found. Life in a concentration camp. A person's life did not matter for the Japanese. 100,000 in a concentration camp, 17,000 died. There were 29 concentration camps on the island of Java alone for women and male children under the age of 12. My brothers were sent to another camp. They were 13 and 15, and they went to the island, to the city of Bandung. Over here is Semarang, this is Semarang. This is the camp my mother and I went to in Semarang. This is the camp where my brothers went to, and ultimately they went to Bandung over here, which is here. Later, this is the camp Lampersari. We tried to visit it. My wife and I went to Indonesia 20 years ago. We tried to visit it. It was gone, completely wiped out. These are called kampungs. This is where the natives stayed, 2-room places. This is where the white people stayed. The people over here were the servants for over here. These are like Broomfield 2-story buildings. Over here, talk about that later, 2 rooms, 4 double beds per room, 8 people per room. The sunroom has another 2 for 18 people. These were the big 2-story buildings with coconut trees around it. 60, 80 to 100 people stayed on those people. Just go back to your home in Broomfield, 2-story. That's the amount of people. I stayed in one of these places over here. Over here, this, the Indonesian word for these is kampung. 18 of us lived in a small 2-room home. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire. Around that, we had something else. We had what we call gedek. This is made out of this bamboo, and this is so you could not see through it. So first you had a barbed wire, then you had this. Japanese guards patrolled day and night. A typical diet was a bowl of soup consisting of water with a spoonful of rice. Rice has 0 medical health issues, has 0 nutrition. So that is why many of the people, most of the people were sick. They did not get B1, they did not get no vegetables, no fruit, no meat. The purpose was to do what? To weaken and slowly, I could not believe this, that was the purpose. Exterminate the prisoners. POW concentration camp. Camp Commander Yamamoto often beat patients requesting drugs. There were no drugs. No anesthesia for operations. In the camp of Borneo, not just Java, but other islands at concentration camps also. 600 out of 1,000 unfit for work. Weight of men from 140 to 4256. Japanese pursued a policy of, I did not realize that, deliberate starvation. Over here, the women. The women picked up the food. If they were by themselves, they got 1 ticket. If they had 3 kids, they got 4 tickets. And they got 4 bowls of soup, water, and rice. When a guard wasn't in view, as a boy, I was able to climb trees and get seagull eggs. One time, while climbing a tree, a guard came. I was able to quickly down the tree with a pocket full of eggs. but they were not eggs anymore. They were scrambled. Another one I told you about, coconut trees. When I was 8 years old, I was able to climb a tall coconut tree up to 60 foot tall. I do not know, I did not take a tape measure with me, so it could have been 30, 40, but it was tall. But I assure you, if I would have slipped, I would not be talking over here and share the coconuts with the people who lived in the house. This is how I must have looked like when I got out of the camp. Did everyone go to a camp? Outside the camp, I talked to a lady who wanted to talk to me from the Indo Club about her experience outside the camp. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. I talked to my wife and I talked to her at length. I got 2 slides out of it. Outside the camp, those living outside the camp had it rough. No husband, no income, no opportunity to work. What do? You guessed. But she also told me this. Rice was a meager staple. Catching a rare squirrel with a slingshot was a welcome treat. When the Japanese were losing the war, they found ways to increase their mistreatment. What did they do? In other words, a reign of terror. The Imperial Japanese Army of Japan, the Imperial Army of Japan had plans to mass liquidate everyone in the camp, POW or concentration camp. The Japanese would not allow any witness. I repeat, any witness. Japan expected an invasion of Japan in September 45. Japanese guards. In 1945, POWs had to dig 7 by 3 foot deep holes. Machine guns were mounted around the corner of the POW camps. And then something happened. The dropping of the A-bomb for the Japanese was a flash from heaven. That released the Japanese from the obligation to die for the emperor and enabled the Japanese to surrender. We remember these dates. August 6th, 3 days later. August 9th, 6 days later, truce. Emperor Hirohito stated in his radio address, the war has progressed in a manner not necessarily to Japan's interest. Imperial Army of Japan, the order to kill would have taken place if not for the final decision to drop the atomic bomb. Japan surrendered just for 6 days after the second bomb and finally signed it on September 2nd. 6 more weeks. Do you remember those 2 people, skin and bone? Do you remember a picture like me, skin and bone? If war would have lasted 6 more weeks, more lives would have been lost through starvation, disease, cruelty, or execution than were lost to the atomic bomb. I'm almost finished. 2 weeks before the war was over, my dad died. This is my middle brother, Gerard. He immigrated to Canada, and he was invited to see my dad's grave in Thailand. This is my dad's grave. Another picture. He died July, just 2 weeks before the war was over. And here close up, and here you can see the name. He was among the older ones. Many of the older ones did not survive. From age 6 to age 9.5, I had no schooling, none. Nobody had any schooling, no playthings, nothing in a concentration camp, and very little until arriving in the Netherlands. The next few years were devoted to intense study. Summers I worked in the UK, England, and Sweden. Before immigrating to the USA, I worked for a year at a German engineering firm. I earned my engineering degree from a college in The Hague. Along with my education, my early possessions were contained in 2 small suitcases. When I was 24, I immigrated legally legally to the US, entering through New York. My sponsors waited for me with a sign on the Annapolis train station. 6 months later, where did I go? Fort Leonard Wood basic training. 6 months later, after I came to America, I ended up in Fort Leonard Wood basic training.
Were you drafted? Is that what happened?
No, at that time, when you came, you had to register and then you had to go. And then you had an option of, I went to the Army Reserve because 3.5 years in a concentration camp was enough. Indonesia gained its independence from the Netherlands in 1949. 250,000 left Indonesia for the Netherlands. Between 45, came later, and 1955, 245 left the Netherlands. 105 left for Canada. My brother Gerard, you saw him at my brother's grave. You will see him 2 more times. 71,000, my oldest brother Robert went to Australia. 26 to South Africa, and lucky me, 23,000, I was one of them that went to America. Thank you, America. About 20 years ago, my wife and I flew to Jakarta, about 50 miles due south of Semarang, where I was born, and driven to Semarang. The main concentration camp was gone, but we were cordially invited in our house in Jakarta over here. This is me before I immigrated to America, to Holland, to the Netherlands. And this is my brother that you saw with my brother's grave. While in the country, we visited 2 well-known temples, the Prambanan and the Borobudur. Isn't that something else? Over there, here's the Borobudur. This statue, they have over 500 statues around this building. Events occurring while growing up in Indonesia. Thank you for helping me as much as you have. I really appreciate it. Did you get something out of it? No.
What questions do you have?
Uh-oh, too many.
Yes.
Can't answer it.
Flash from heaven is considered a religious sign, so that's why they were able to surrender when the atomic bomb was dropped.
They had a big argument, but he knows more about it. They had a big argument about the surrender. The emperor wanted to surrender, so the other part said, no, we are not gonna surrender. And finally, he won out.
Well, the question, I think, also, fella, is how did you learn that the war was over? What happened? in the
Okay,
camp?
there is a difference from several people I've heard. When the war was over, the Japanese were gone. The gates were open. And many of the concentration camps on Java, the people lived close by. We lived in Semarang, and the concentration camp was in Semarang. So when they opened the gates, we walked to home. And many people the same thing. But then you had a huge, huge problem. The Indonesians wanted independence, and the Japanese helped them to get their independence. So then they started attacking the Dutch people over there. And there were some Kata people, and they start picking all the young men from the different people that came back from the camp. They picked up my brother, my 18-year-old brother, Robert. But fortunately, the person that picked him up was a student for my dad. They said, no, let him go. The other 70 were taken away, and they were all executed. My brother survived because the person that was taking my brother happened to be a student for my dad. Yes, sir.
Did any of the Japanese soldiers, were they held accountable for these atrocities?
Good question. At the end of the war, about 1,000 people in charge of the camps were taken to court. 900 were
Convicted?
convicted. 242 were executed. So there were many were cruel, but that is the way the Japanese were taught. Right now, what about the people in Israel? They think differently. Killing 1,300 people, beheading them, that is their way of thinking.
That's
Hamas. So that is the way they do the right thing. The only way to get to heaven is by killing you. Anybody else?
You run in any orangutan?
The orangutan lives on 2 islands. This island over here, Sumatra and Borneo. There's a slight difference in size, but they only live in these 2 islands, and they kept separate. And if you go to the Denver Zoo, you have the orangutan from here or from here, but they do not mix.
Really?
They can mix, but they do not mix.
My cousin, Virginia Carlson, was a missionary in Sumatra,
Yep.
but I don't know her married name or her 3 kids' names because they all survived.
The family I'm talking about, they went back to Europe, and the husband was sick, and many people in the camp were permanently, very a side effect is that you lose your memory. If you had it just for a day, you lose a little bit. If you had it longer, it is a permanent loss of memory. And there are many people that survived the camp but did not live a normal life.
Well, Louis, thank you so much for sharing your, and it was one of our little challenge points.
Did I?
Yes.
Did I do it?
Yeah.
I could not talk for an hour on a concentration camp because there is nothing.
Well, but your daily life, what it was like, but anyway, no.
You expected
did
something.
fine.
You expected
did
something
fine.
different. I'm sorry.
No, you did fine. You did fine with that. Thank you, and please come up and visit some more. Visit the rest of the museum if you haven't. Thank you.
Thank you for trusting me. You expected less pictures, or you expected less. That's what you wanted.